call the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order for May 16th. If we could do a roll call, please.
Ryan. Present. Brooks.
Here.
Rob. Here. Alyssa. Here. Michael. Here.
Okay, we've got a quorum. Thanks everybody for coming. If we can have a motion to approve the agenda, or if someone has any changes.
Motion to approve.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Minutes. Everyone's had a chance to review the minutes. Any corrections, or else I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Second.
We got a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the May 2nd meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So now is the time for public comments, and that's for anyone in the audience that would like to address the commission. If you're on the agenda later, we suggest you just wait until that time. If you are interested in addressing the commission, we ask you to come forward, press the red button, give us your name and address, and tell us what you're thinking. Anybody here for public comment? Nope. Seeing no public comment, we're going to move on to new business. We have election of the vice chairperson. I would entertain a motion from someone for someone to be the vice chairman.
The vice chair acts as the chairman if the city council rep is chairman is not present. I'd like to nominate Alyssa.
Okay. We've got a nomination for Alyssa Teely. Is there a second?
Second.
Any other volunteers? It's always, yeah. You just hear the train coming down the track, don't you, on these things? Yeah, okay. All right. All in favor of Alyssa serving as vice chairman for another year, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. You got it, girl. All right. Next, we're going to deal with conditional use application for 100 East Holly Boulevard. I'll turn it over to staff.
So we have the applicant is on the phone, they're on the conference call. This is on Holly Boulevard. If you look through the packet, this is the future home of Domino's, as well as a retail space, and likely a restaurant on the end. In front of you, staff has written up kind of our opinion on how we approach the zoning ordinance based on. So for each potential use in the facility, we look at its location and the features of it generally. If there's a drive-through window in a shopping plaza, we generally opt towards that, and it's on an end cap, probably a restaurant location. If it does not, it's in the middle, usually a retail, so we add all those up, and we look at highest and best use, not necessarily the proposed use, just because, well, we hope Domino's and everything else that goes in here does extremely well, and they're there for 40 years, and we run into situations where there are similar things around town where tenants change over time. So we try to find what the most likely highest use is and go from there, just because 10 years down the road from now, it's difficult to get people to put in parking spaces if they don't currently exist. So the email you have in front of you kind of lays out how staff came to this. Currently, based on the numbers we came up with, they are short parking spaces, but we do have a provision in the zoning code that allows shared parking. So if two or more uses have different peak times, then they're allowed to, as set by planning and zoning, knock off some of those parking spaces, just because when we went through this, the goal was kind of, we did not want a sea of parking with few businesses. We wanted to have some practicality to it. So I will turn it over to the applicant or anyone on the commission.
With shared parking, how many spaces are you requiring? Is that what's on the sheet here? The 21, 6, 6, and 17 for the Domino's? Is that what you're, with the shared parking, is that what you're at? Or
That sounds right. Just because the restaurants are a 1 per 100 square feet and retail is 1 per 300. So that's where the number difference comes from. And The applicant would be able to fill in on, I mean, we could count them out, but they're short a few spaces, so they're hoping that we can utilize the shared parking section of the zoning code to allow their development to move forward.
Can you ask the man on the phone to tell us his name for the record?
Thank you.
I looked at their diagram and I can't tell I can tell where you pick up your pizza, but I can't tell where you drive, if you're driving through where you would order it.
Well, yeah, but Domino's Pizza, so our business model is not an ordering kiosk. Everything has to be ordered ahead of time. Obviously, because we don't have ready to serve food, it's basically made as you order. So essentially, our window is not a drive-through; it is just a pickup window. And what we've learned over the years here with our pickup windows is, I don't know if many of you have been in a Domino's Pizza or not, but in our lobbies, they have what's called a carryout tracker, where up on a screen it shows if your pizza's ready or if it's in the oven or it's being made type of thing. We have a similar monitor sitting right out at the beginning of the pickup lane that would indicate to the customer, yes, your pizza is ready. Come through the pickup lane, and basically they pull up to the window, tell us their name, and we grab it. The length of time they're sitting at that window is no more than maybe about 2 minutes. It's basically a grab and go concept. Every once in a while, you do get someone that fails to read the screen and they pull up to the window. If that happens, then our team members will direct that customer to pull out of the lane and pull into a parking spot close by, and then we can bring it out to them. So it's a grab and go concept, not an actual ordering kiosk lane.
So I got a couple questions. Number one, just to confirm, there is no in-store eating.
No, very small lobby, more or less a waiting space.
Okay.
No, there will be possibly one table and two chairs, maybe two, but it's all just waiting space, not a dine-in.
And my second question, what are the hours of operation?
So Chris is talking to me through text. I'm apparently the password for the conference call does not work, so I'm trying to get him to call my cell phone. We can just put it on speaker and put it up by the microphone. But I'm waiting on him to call my phone.
So, no worries, we'll just wait until he gets on. I think, one of our members has another question.
I don't have any questions, I just have some commentary that I want to share. I sent an email to Patrick and Paul earlier this week, and I think that kind of instigated the email that you guys have in front of you. So just a couple of comments. So on the shared parking, I have some concerns because the intent of shared parking is for entities that have different times of occupation. You know, maybe,
Nope, that's all right. I will put you over by the other phone, and hopefully we don't get some reverb or something weird. But so Chris Thielen is now on the line.
maybe an application where a business is open at night, another business is open during the day, or one's a weekend business, one's a weekday business, which I don't know if the four entities in this particular strip mall would apply. And I had messaged that back a couple weeks ago, and then this week, when it came up again, I was questioning if this is truly a restaurant per our definition, which has a higher density and greater parking need. So retail is 1 to 300, and when we look at our definition of a restaurant, I'm pulling it up here. It says an establishment where food and drink is prepared, comma, served, comma, and consumed primarily within the principal building. As I look at this, I do not see Domino's as a restaurant. I see it as a retail business, no different than a bakery, a donut shop, or any other type of retail where you basically come in, purchase, and leave. You're not there for an extended
Yep,
period of time.
and actually you kind of nailed it on the head. In quite a few other jurisdictions across the country, we are classified.
That's my interpretation. I'm only one of 6 on this board.
Yep.
The staff's concern is that long-term, this would be a prime site for a restaurant of some type, and what would be the additional use if something would happen to Domino's, and that's the concern, because adding parking spaces back in isn't very feasible. So that's kind of the concern, is the long term of this site. Would we be limiting the use of this building by parking? So that's kind of where the concern is at. Not that your current plan needs the additional parking. It's that what happens if that changes, because things change, and then are we limiting the use of a building? So that's the
We don't have a floor plan. All we have is site plans. The reason I'm asking is if Domino's was to leave and someone else was to lease this space, just because it has a drive-up window, in my mind, doesn't constitute that it's gonna be a restaurant. It's pretty easy to board up a window.
You gotta remember that if Domino's leaves and somebody else comes in, and they're gonna wanna utilize that as a ordering window or a, pickup, ordering kiosk, we don't have the sufficient stacking for that on the site.
Right, that's the point I'm getting at, is just because there's a drive-up window does not constitute that the next tenant is necessarily gonna be a restaurant. It could be a bank,
Correct.
it could be,
Yep.
it could be anything. It could be a coffee shop. So, just because a building has a drive-up window, I don't think it should be classified as a restaurant. So, I'm hesitant to grant this as shared parking because if we do, the next person that comes in and they don't have different hours of operations can say, well, it was granted on this particular site. And so it starts to set precedents. Now, if there's proof that any of the other businesses will forever be on different times than the others, then yes, it makes sense. But I don't know if I would want to put that on the owner of the property. I don't know if Domino's is the owner of the property or not. That they,
Yeah, I mean, one of our entities is the owner of the property, so, for lack of a better word, we're gonna be a tenant in our own property, and we are gonna invest quite a bit of money into this, so Domino's will be there for 20+ years, I can guarantee you that. But, I mean, obviously, we have to plan 30 and 40 years down the road, but, yes, us as an owner, we would have.
I guess new kind of coming in this, how many parking spaces short are we? Or is this 5? Is it 20?
So I did some quick calculator work, and I might be off 1 or 2 depending on how I hit the buttons, and Chris could certainly supplement. But it looks like, adding up the numbers, 50 are required, and they have 44 on the plan. So it would be a 6 reduction.
And if I'm hearing right, Brian, you would feel more comfortable reclassifying this as something other than restaurant than saying it's a restaurant and doing shared parking. That's kind of where you're at.
I don't think it's a restaurant, that's my opinion.
Right.
So
So,
I don't think we need to be addressing this tonight.
so if
In my opinion, this is my opinion only, but to me, this is retail. You
And
go
if-
in, you buy, and you leave. You don't stay and consume.
if it's retail, then we're down to like 6 stalls. Is that right? More in line with the other units.
Staff's counter to that interpretation would be then that would effectively eliminate the requirement for a restaurant at all. Because then everything we would just automatically assume is retail. Because there would be no differentiating factor.
No,
Well, but it's not.
But our restaurant says consumption on the facility.
Correct.
This one does not have consumption on the facility.
Correct. We do not, staff does not look directly at Domino's. We look at what is most likely to a restaurant space to look like. So if we look at it, whether it's Jimmy John's, whether it's Domino's, whether it's Jersey Mike's, whether it's a Burger King, that is how we look at it rather than the specific. We look at the use generally rather than the specific tenant. Because we go for what generally works for the market, just because when these things are built, we generally do not know the tenants, so we have to plan as if it is a typical average user.
But a typical strip mall does not mean it has a restaurant. I mean, another restaurant could come in the middle,
If it,
or the restaurant on the other end could leave, and another business could go in that's not even food related.
correct, looking at the market, we determined that more likely than not, a strip mall with end caps with drive-throughs are food restaurants, especially on main route locations.
Is, the building to the east of there with Starbucks, or, I'm sorry, Scooters on one side and the pharmacy on the
Correct.
other? are those-
That is a pharmacy, so that is not a restaurant.
But,
Then you have Brandon 90 where you have Jimmy John's. That is a
I'm just saying,
How
the
was that
pharmacy,
looked at? When the pharmacy, when that got put in there, was that looked at as a restaurant or a pharmacy? Cause technically it should be looked at as a restaurant with a drive-through.
I cannot speak to that one, but we made Jimmy John's act as a restaurant because of the drive-through window. And they specifically took out the drive-through window on the other side to be reclassified as something else.
but Jimmy John's has on-site seating,
Correct.
so. I mean, I get where you're coming from. I also get where Domino's is coming from, and where Brian's coming from. And I guess where I'm coming from is if we're 6 off, I kind of agree with Brian. We don't want to say that we're going to use the shared parking rule, because the part of the requirement of that is you have different time zones or time uses, and we can't say that here. So if we use that, everyone's going to use that. I don't think that just the drive-through makes it a restaurant, because just next door they have a drive-through and it's a pharmacy. So I don't know. I think there's merit to saying it's retail. If it's retail, we're actually over on our parking. So I don't know. I get where you're coming from, though.
My question back would be then, we have a blank space. How do we determine it's a restaurant versus a retail if we just have 4 walls? And if we can't, then the restaurant classification is meaningless.
What do you mean a blank space?
If we have a blank space with 4 walls that has no drive-through window, then if that's not a differentiating factor, then how do we determine the difference? Because we have to plan ahead. Most times they are built without a tenant. So how do we ever apply the restaurant classification?
But the tenant has to come in for building permit. And so,
Most times a building is built and then a specific tenant comes in for a remodel.
I understand that. So when they come in for a remodel and it is a use that does not fit the site, then they can't move in there.
Is the city willing to tell people they cannot purchase certain property?
Well, that,
There has been several times where I've had that exact example.
I don't know,
yeah, it's no different than if somebody wants to add on and that addition causes an additional need for parking, they need to provide that parking. Now, if they want to remodel and that remodel causes an additional demand for parking, they have to add parking. I mean, I run into that all the time.
If the city council is willing to tell somebody that they cannot move into a space, then that is the way we will go. Generally, we have not done in the past, because generally they build out a space and they will buy the space and then they will come to us having purchased the space, and then we'd have to tell them the city says you can't go there.
but aren't we doing that right now, to a point, telling them they can or can't go there? By telling them, to a point, they're labeling it what they want it to be, but that can change in 10 years anyway. Any building can in this town. This building did.
I think this came up when the church went into the old Fastenal building.
The difference between the two is this is not built yet.
But I think this came up many years ago when the church went into the Fastenal strip mall building. There was not much parking there. We allowed it because that was a perfect example of shared parking. Where you have a church, which is nights and weekends, and you have other retail, which is weekdays. And so we allowed that to happen in that situation.
The layout of this is very similar to the building to the east. There isn't a order window and a pickup window, just like at the pharmacy. On the west side, like Scooters, there's an order window, and then you come around and pick it up. That I could see much more an argument for that being a restaurant style, because that's lined up that way with an order window, order lane, and then a pickup window. If we have a tenant that is planning on building this building and they're saying that their use is not in what we define as a restaurant, I think it's a little much to say that their use is a restaurant. And if it changes down the road, it may put someone out that they can't have what they want there because the parking isn't right. That does go a little bit to the builder's risk, more so than us saying we have to make an assumption and go outside the lines of our current parking and other things kind of to make it work. I think it's outside of what we need to do.
I mean, it really would be no different than if they took down the wall in the two middle spaces and wanted to lease that out to another restaurant. It'd be the same situation. They'd be coming in, they'd be over their parking count, and we should not allow that to happen. And they could easily do that. I mean, they don't have to have a drive-up window to have a restaurant. We could have a Gruff move in there, or a Tailgaters, or
You can even have a restaurant, very small space, little sandwich shop or something. Could be anywhere.
So is our decision, tonight, if you do the CPU, because theoretically they're short of parking spots, or if you reclassify it as retail, they have plenty of parking spots, is that the two things that we're trying to determine? I'm new to this, so is that what we're looking at?
And just looking at rough numbers, so they got 44 spots. If they do it at retail, they need around 40, maybe 41, something like that, I don't know. But they have enough. And if they keep it as restaurant, it's 50. So that's kind of the they have, it looks like they have plenty of room if we reclassify it as retail, and they're short. And then we have to look at that shared parking, which I don't know that it falls under because it's not really a different time or different use. Yeah, because we don't know what the other tenants are, so.
So our ordinances specify restaurant,
Correct. There is a separate standard for restaurant versus retail.
so maybe we need to look at that.
I calculated that if they were retail and the other two empty spaces are retail, that they would need a total of 37 and they have 44 shown.
Should we reclassify the other end cap then as retail?
No, because that has in-house dining. I'm assuming it does. We don't have.
We don't know because it doesn't exist. That's the
We
same
don't have,
situation
we
here.
don't have privy to a floor plan.
But-
to
How do we
determine-
differentiate as staff moving forward?
I
That's
get where
the
you're coming
problem.
from, Patrick, but we have a builder that wants to classify this and has a use that isn't restaurant. The other side has an order window and a pickup window. I think if they weren't saying, yes, we're gonna put a Domino's in there, and they were just, it was really vague. I understand what you're saying, but the builder is carrying the risk here, and they have a defined use that isn't dining. If something changes, the new tenant, new buyer, whoever will have to look at that, and it may not work for parking, but the builder is saying we have a use, and I don't know that we can look that far in the future that hard to overrule their use. If it changes, it changes.
I agree. If they come back 2 months down the road and they want to put a restaurant in one of the two middle ones, they can. But they've come forward and admitted that one of these spots, they want to be a restaurant. Maybe they don't have a floor plan yet. Maybe they don't even have a tenant yet. But they're indicating that, yes, one of these is going to be a restaurant and the other three are going to be retail. And they're going to be limited what they can do in the other three unless they either add parking or change something else. I mean, if the tenant on the far left side doesn't end up being a restaurant, they could put a restaurant in one of the other spots. But every time they go in and remodel, they would have to come in for a building permit, and the parking calcs would have to be recalculated. I mean, we do this all the time. Anytime somebody buys a building, that's part of the process, of the design process, is you have to determine, do we have enough parking for this type of use? This use is different than the previous use.
I think it's similar to if there was a piece of property that was zoned general business and someone came in and wanted to change that to R1, we probably wouldn't fight them that hard. We might say that's not a good idea. But before they get built, they want to change it back, and maybe somebody builds around it with residential, and then all of a sudden they want to change it back to general business, they would have a fight, So I think it's similar to that. I think the person that's making this requirement has a use, and their use fits with the parking. If they want to change it later, they have to fit in the uses. So I understand where you're coming from, but here we have someone that's defining this as a retail, and I don't know how hard we can push against a plan that, yeah, it could change, but then they'll, like everything else, they'll have to change with that.
So are you, gentlemen, are you comfortable with that possibility down the road that things change and you might be limited as to what you can put in there because of the lower number of parking spots?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Okay, so planning and zoning, we recognize that staff may not be comfortable with the direction that you're going. So just before you make a motion and decide, that would be just something to keep in mind.
Just a question or maybe a comment, I don't know how it'll come out here, but so this conditional use, because it's being applied for by the owner of the full property, if this board were to have a motion and approve a conditional use, that would exist for as long as that owner owns the property? How does that sit with a conditional use?
The conditional use permit would go with the land.
But the conditional use is for the shared parking. How does it, what's our influence with saying that the use should be retail? How does that, do we make that recommendation to city council or where, because that's not the conditional use, that's,
Correct. We would have, if that's a different process, appealing a staff decision to the Board of Adjustment. It's you all, but it's a whole different process, and that is something that I would have to figure out with the city administrator. It might take that process.
My concern with going with shared parking is with this all being retail and or restaurant, and the unknown of what future tenants might be. The only way I could possibly imagine passing this as a shared parking conditional use would be to put a restriction that one of the businesses not be open during the hours that the other three businesses are. Cause that's right there, under C.1 in our ordinance, under shared parking, the intent. Shared parking represents an arrangement in which two or more land uses on the same lot with different peak parking demands, hours of operation.
So the way staff views that as well is if you look at the average and the likely of each type of uses, most retail businesses are open 8 or 9 to 5. Most restaurants in Brandon, even though we're getting better and we're getting more of a day crowd, tend to be night businesses. You do have some that are open at noon, but most tend to be night businesses. So the overlap there is most retail businesses. If you look at Dollar General to the east or other ones, it's generally a flat line throughout the day. They have a little bit of a peak on the weekend, about 3 o'clock. Most restaurants, their peak hours are 5:30 to 7:30. That's why staff proposed the shared parking, because
So
there
would
isn't
we-
an overlap of peak.
would we have to put in a condition then that at least one business in there is a restaurant? And at least one business in there is retail then, in order to meet that?
And that's where it kind of comes, the planning part of that becomes difficult, because we have to approach a hypothetical future situation where I don't know if the condition would be necessary. You set the number based on the likelihood, based on how staff interpret it as. You look at it, is it a duck? It's a duck. Is it a cat? It's a cat. Is it a frog? It's a frog. We looked at it and saw 2 retail, 2 food. So we played the likelihood. So the likelihood in our mind was that rough arrangement would be kind of the foundation of the conditional use permit. It wouldn't necessarily require a condition, but that was kind of the layout of the land.
So then when wouldn't strip mall meet that requirement then?
It depends, but most likely, most times they would. And that would differentiate a strip mall for parking, just because there are a lot more businesses than just one building on a lot with one use. So it would allow a reduction in many circumstances.
I mean, I suppose that makes sense. You have your peak is going to be different than your neighbor, no matter what you do. But if you're just one business, your peak is your peak, and so that kind of makes a little bit. You have a little bit more ebb and flow, I suppose. But I think making those assumptions whittles away at the requirement for shared parking a little bit. But I understand where you're coming from again. It kind of makes sense, but
So I have a question. Our definition of restaurant, or do we call it eating and drinking establishment? Does our definition say that people would then sit inside to eat?
So that's
Or does
kind
it
of,
just say food, that
So-
sell food?
yep. So we've had a little back and forth on definitions. We have a definition of restaurant that is where food and drink is prepared, served, and consumed primarily within the principal building. So the term for the parking does not use the term restaurant. It uses eating and drinking establishment. So are they the same? Probably. Is the language used the same? No. So it's another thing that on our long list of things we need to take a look at.
Right,
So-
it should be consistent. Because there's
so
a lot of
technically
places.
an eating and drinking establishment
Yeah.
does not necessarily have to be a restaurant.
Right, because a lot of different kind of places could serve food or sell food that aren't a restaurant or eating in, yeah. So I think our definition, we need to look at that and fix that, make it consistent. Because any space in any building could end up being a restaurant where you eat inside. You know? So, and we're never gonna know ahead of time, for sure. So, it seems to me like any space would be considered a retail space until you know for sure that a restaurant is going in there where you sit and eat inside.
And the problem there is we can't plan reactionary.
I guess I was just thinking if we would switch it to retail, doesn't that deter other restaurants from wanting to come into that space at some point if Domino's were to leave? Wouldn't it make it harder for a new restaurant to come in?
I mean, it shouldn't because like, I don't think it would deter anyone from what you're saying.
I think in a way, going to what you're saying is that the condition of this parcel in the building that's proposed already kind of does discourage. That's why we're having this discussion, because the way with this proposed building and the condition of the lot and the buildable area and all that, that's why we're here, because it doesn't quite support enough parking for that. So, and I now understand more about the difficulty of the position of the staff with the projection and trying to project the uses on a property like this, so.
And it would only deter someone if the other end was a restaurant. If the other end was any of the number of uses that could be retail with a window, then there would be plenty of parking for this unit to be a restaurant. So it's only going to deter someone if there's another restaurant in there. And then it depends on what the parking requirements are at that time. If it's 20 years down the road, who knows what our parking requirements might be at that time. So we might increase our parking requirements, and then it wouldn't be able to fit anyway. And so we can only look so far in the future. I don't know. I'm leaning towards idea of this being retail, but I also understand that this could be shared parking, but if we're gonna say that this is suitable for shared parking, I kinda think that any strip mall with, X amount of units is suitable for shared parking, and I think that's something we would need to discuss, because we have three tenants that we don't know what their time's gonna be, and we're considering using the shared parking with that unknown. So if we're gonna say that they can have shared parking with this strip mall, then I think we need to really look at our requirements for shared parking and the requirement for there to be different times. If we're gonna say that with three unknown tenants, it fits that.
I don't know if I buy that there's different peaks. I mean, they're all retail related, they're all gonna be peaking around 5 o'clock. As people come and go to work, people come and go to pick up pizza, people come and go to eat dinner, people come and go to stop and buy something on their way home from work. So, in my mind, I don't see differing peak demands.
But is someone willing to make a motion in one direction or another? We're,
Well, this is what I was gonna say, just to recap real quickly. So the action before us is the conditional use. And how we got here was that staff made a decision based on what they saw. But we don't have an action in front of us on a staff decision. That's a different process, potentially, if that were something so the only thing we have in front of us is the conditional use permit, up or down. Okay.
but then. Right.
Correct, yeah.
But where does that leave these gentlemen then if you choose not to go with the conditional use, then where does that leave them? Because of course they're developers and need to get moving. Where does that leave us?
Staff would reconsider its decision. If it comes to the same conclusion, it would take a formal appeal to the Board of Adjustment. Correct. This is a conditional use hearing that would take an appeal of a staff decision. Correct.
Yeah, I think we've been having discussion, but it's not up to us to say the staff decision was right or wrong. We're discussing it in context of this conditional use permit.
I guess in light of all this discussion, I'll make a motion to deny the application.
Second.
So we have a motion to deny the conditional use after lengthy discussion. So we're going to call for a vote. Do you want a voice vote or a roll call vote? Let's go roll call. Will you call it, Paul?
Megan,
So, and just so we're clear for the record, an aye vote is a vote to deny. A nay vote is an against the motion.
Nay.
Ryan,
Aye.
Brooks,
Aye.
Rob, Alyssa, Michael,
Aye.
so 4-2.
So 4-2, so the motion to deny the conditional use permit has been approved. So there are two procedures that we can do from here. One is an appeal to the city council of that decision, and we need to know that, I think it's 5 working days. Then the other route would be, if you don't want to go that route, you would need, we would talk as staff, and if we keep the same interpretation, you would need to appeal that interpretation to the Board of Adjustment. Correct.
So, yeah, thank you very much for calling in, gentlemen. We appreciate it. So the staff will determine and then give us a heads up as to what we're doing next? Is that what we're doing?
Staff will, unless they want to appeal the conditional use permit denial, they could let us know and we would get that rolling. From here, staff will consider what was said today and reevaluate our decision. If it's the same, we will let them know and they can appeal from there. Or if it changes, then it changes and it's fine. Correct, and then reconvene as the Board of Adjustment. Normally, the chair has not done the whole roll call thing just because
Yeah.
no one left.
Yeah, we're
But,
still here.
Yep, you have to adjourn and reconvene.
Okay, so we're going to adjourn Planning and Zoning Commission, reconvene as Board of Adjustment. All members of the commission are here, so we will forego the roll call vote. And we are now dealing with a variance.
Okay, next up is the approval of the agenda for the Board of Adjustment.
My agenda, sorry, approval of the agenda for Board of Adjustment, please.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for Board of Adjustment. All in favor? Opposed? All right, the agenda's approved, and then we're going to the variance.
So this is a variance application for 924 East Redwood. The applicant would have liked to be here, but pressing circumstances have kept him away, as you can see in kind of the email packet. What they are requesting is the south side setbacks to be somewhere between 5 and 10 feet. Based on staff's interpretation of what constitutes a front yard, it would be everything in front of the building to the property line. The south piece of that is a front yard, even though it's a non-traditional layout. There are other places in town where that has also been interpreted as a front yard, one being over by the apartments in Aspen Ridge. You have the circle and then that lot. So similar thing there. So they are requesting, rather than the 25 feet front yard setback, they are requiring it to be somewhere 5 or 10 instead of 25.
Before we start, this is a variance, and so we cannot put conditions on this, correct?
The language of the zoning code does say you can attach conditions. I can read it off once I dig through the book. It's in here somewhere. It says, to preserve the intent of these zoning regulations and to protect the public interest, the Board of Adjustment may attach conditions to a variance, and that is 15-20-4G, roughly 128 in the zoning code.
Sir, I should have asked you earlier, are you here to make any comments on anything, or are you just observing? Okay, in this particular situation, okay, you may approach and give us your comments if you'd like at this time. Okay, if you want it, just like public hearing, if you just want to push the button, give us your name and address. Let's hear what you have to say, and then we'll continue to discuss.
Okay, my name is Dan Anderson, and I'm part of the Redwood Plaza Association, which is the property south of this property. And the only comment I have is, I think there's a big challenge for the owner to build a building there. But I think as a consensus, the association would be okay with a 10-foot setback, which would help him able to get drainage away from his building, and not onto our side of the fence, I guess. So, I mean, if that was the end result, we would support that, but not 5 feet, pretty tight, yeah. That's it. Nope. Sorry.
Thanks for your comments. Okay, commission, comment away, please.
I'm kind of wondering if we don't need to have more of a comprehensive discussion on lots that are similar to this, that are surrounded by like zoning, that are set off of the street, because it doesn't have, you know, the need for a typical front yard, but there should be some discussion on how we look at that setback, because I don't know if it should be the same as the backyard or the side yards or all that, but there are other properties that are surrounded by, you know, kind of an interior lot of some sort, and I kind of wonder if we do a variance here, if we're setting ourselves up for something that we're not thinking about on another property, that they could just kind of come in and all of a sudden, well, we proved this variance, so I have the same situation, and that's my concern, is if we need to have a deep dive into that. Right, Barb? We should do deep dives on everything tonight? Right?
Let's do a deep dive. As we all are aware, the variance is a high standard. We have to be able to fill out the form that Brooks is looking at right now, so, just so we know.
As I thought about this, I was thinking the same thing, you know, this does not front on a street, and that's kind of what our setbacks are for. The reason I asked my initial question was this parcel is a little bit unique in that it does have a long drive, and I know, in some, municipalities, we'd have some issues with fire department access. And so, regardless of what we do tonight, I would recommend that if we grant this variance, that we at least put a stipulation in here to allow emergency vehicles to turn around. And Tammy would have to work with the applicant to provide a hammerhead or a cul-de-sac or something for emergency vehicles to get in there, fight a fire, and be able to get their vehicles back out safely. So,
Did you know there was a fire there a couple weeks ago?
I'd heard there was. I didn't know if it was that particular
Yeah.
location.
It was
but I
back
knew
there.
there was one in that area.
One of the campers, I think. But yeah, anyway, I didn't know if that was what brought that up.
The front yard is the side of the building where the address is, right?
So the front yard is the pole all the way to, by definition, the front of the principal structure.
Yeah, their access is off of Redwood and their address is off of Redwood.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's unique because front yard setback is measured from property lines. So you have not just the property line on Redwood, but you have the property line behind the other building. That would also be a front yard by definition. Just because the way the zoning code works is all the yards are based off the definition of front yard, because then it goes the opposite of the front yard is the rear yard, and everything else are side yards. So every lot needs a front yard. So that creates a
Have they
complication.
said they want to build other building other, like the one that's there already?
Correct. In kind of the area where you see the campers and everything on their diagram.
And it doesn't look like there's room for that if all those vehicles are there.
I would hope they'd move the vehicles before they built the building.
So, yeah, it doesn't look like they would have any place to put the vehicles.
Maybe they plan on indoor vehicle storage rather than just having them outdoors. I'm not sure. We just have the language
Sure.
that they sent us.
So what would be the justification to reduce it from 25 to 10 or 5? Because it's not right on Redwood? I mean, I'm trying to figure out what would be the difference.
So they're saying their hardship is that they're landlocked? so
Their
to speak?
hardship they're claiming is the shape of the lot.
Patrick,
At least that's my understanding. It helps in the applicants here because I don't like speaking for them because
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
not advocating for them. I'm just trying to relay what they said.
Okay, it's a rectangle lot, doesn't have an unusual shape at all.
To me, it's more the location of the lot than the shape or the topography.
Patrick, have you seen in any other jurisdictions where they have a different setback if they're kind of, I don't know, landlocked or something like that? A property like this where it doesn't have frontage onto a street really?
I
Have you
haven't
seen-
seen any, but I also haven't looked. So, just going with the definitions we have is whether that needs to be, as you said, a deep dive that we take, generally look at and make changes. But unfortunately, we deal with the definitions we have until they change. I have not seen any, but I haven't necessarily looked. We do have quite a few interesting shaped lots. If you go down South Sioux Boulevard, you have one that is a long strip and then it expands out into a residential property. So there are a few of these in town.
Do I remember correctly, because this came up for discussion before in some fashion for something else, this lot, I think, and this lot owns that drive access, that's part of the lot?
Correct. So
And
this
then
lot
there's
was previously here because they wanted a rezone. And so this was a couple months ago.
Yeah.
In the packet of extra things, they did send along the right-of-way easement. I think that's for this. They sent it today, and I have not had a time to review it. But this is likely the agreement between the property owners for that access in and off of that strip. But I have not reviewed it.
Are they planning to build one more building or two or?
I've only heard of the one,
Because if
but
you
I
would- if
imagine
you
they
would-
might potentially build on the east side as well. I
If you
don't
would
know.
match that building, I'm just saying that's a 50-foot wide building just from measuring quick online. They got 25 in the back. You'd have 50 foot in between each building to put another 50-foot wide building and still have 25 feet up front. Quick measurements online, but usually those are pretty.
It might be the case they do plan on making it a triple with the one and adding two more. I don't know it.
That was how much between buildings?
Another 50 foot.
50
The lot's about, according to GIS, it's like 200 foot long. And there's 25 foot setback on the back of the building that's existing there already, according to GIS. And then I measured the width of that building, it's about 50 foot. So you'd have you could put another 50 foot building on there wide and still have 50 foot in between each of those buildings. And still continue with your 25 foot setback, which would be in compliance then.
Does staff take a position on these variances or not?
We generally have not. We kind of leave it up to the Board of Adjustment to determine if there's a hardship.
Yeah, I know our decision really shouldn't be based on what they end up doing. I kinda looked at it like you did, Rob, and, okay, so if they go with a 10-foot setback, well, then you're not gonna be able to access units on the south side. There's not enough room to maneuver. And so what does that space become? And is it gonna be maintained? But I don't think we can make a decision strictly based on assumptions. Versus if it's like you said, a 50-foot aisle between the two buildings, a 50-foot building and 25-foot access, so you can actually drive in and out of units that face the south. But here again, we can't make assumptions on what they're gonna put there, so assuming only a 10-foot setback would mean they would not have access on the south side, which, I don't know, could be a benefit or a hindrance.
On page 48 of our packet, exception number 2, the front yard setback on lots abutting a public street shall be 25 feet. If the lot contains or abuts a private street, mutual access easement, the front yard setback shall be 15 feet, measured from the edge of the sidewalk easement that is closest to the structure. So the majority of this property does not abut a public street. If they are, they're not going to block their driveway, does that 15-foot rule exception number 2 apply? If not, why wouldn't it apply? I'm just asking because I don't know.
Did we ever determine if there was an actual mutual access easement? Because this is a right-of-way agreement for utilities. So, absent knowing more, it's just their lot.
I'm just saying it doesn't abut a public street.
The lot itself does. The tail is part of the lot.
The exception number 2 was for cases where developers were putting in private streets, and so the property line went down the middle of the street. And so if you have a 25-foot, say, and most of those are residential, so if you have a 25-foot setback off the middle of the street, you can back out of your garage and your bumper is in the street.
Sure.
So that's why we added that verbiage about the 15 feet from the edge of the sidewalk or easement, was to address those situations.
Caro's Place is one example, close to where you live, sir.
So stepping back, for variance, we have to have a specific hardship. So has someone come up with a specific hardship in this particular case? Brian said the location of the land was a possibility. Somebody
guess to
said
me-
the shape.
The location, orientation of this parcel. It doesn't have the benefit of the front yard, or sorry, the benefit of being adjacent to the public way, but yet it's hindered as if it did have the benefits of being along the public way, if that makes sense. It's held to a higher standard for a benefit that it does not have.
Other thoughts, comments? It's unfortunate that he's not able to be here. Is it something that we ever put off and have the applicant come? Or how have you guys handled this in the past?
I think probably either way. If you feel there would be some benefit to having the applicant here that he could better explain something, then you certainly could continue the discussion for another meeting.
I guess I kind of agree on the tabling it. I'd like to hear why, or what his plans are, why he wants the variance, more specifically.
Yeah, I think that there are some unique aspects to this parcel, but I'm not sure. I think I'm still having a hard time kind of going back to around what Rob said, that I don't know that this renders the ability to use the land unfeasible without the variance for me.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time seeing a hardship, although, and I can kind of see the point that Brian made, that he doesn't have benefits like a frontage that other properties have, but so I'm not sure that's enough. I'm not sure that's enough of a hardship to qualify for a variance. I also would like to wait and have the guy be here.
But if this lot was sitting on Redwood, he'd have to be 25 foot back. That whole property line.
Correct. If the tail did not exist and he was
Yes.
right up on Redwood, yes.
Yes.
So maybe if we grant him a variance, he has an advantage over somebody who is on Redwood. So
But some of the reasons
Right,
that,
that's not a hardship, then that's an advantage.
But he also doesn't have a front yard. If you guys get what I'm saying. His front yard is everybody else's backyard. So he doesn't have, that's what I'm saying, he doesn't have the benefit of having access to a public way. He doesn't have the benefit that everybody else around him has a true front yard. They have access to that open air. So no matter where he faces front, he's looking at somebody else's back. Does that make sense?
Well,
I guess the only thing I have, I mean, it's maybe I'm thinking of like a third stall garage if you would add it onto a house. If the lot doesn't call for it, you don't get it. Usually. I mean, I don't know if this is a very unique lot. I mean, it's not like it's crazy. It's still pretty much rectangle except that sliver. It's not maybe a non-mutual access easement, but that's how it's used, or it's used by all those tenants in that area.
So do we want to make a motion one way or the other? Do we want to continue it? What's the feeling of the commission?
If it goes through as I'd be okay at 15 feet probably myself. I don't know about, I'd rather be 15 instead of 10. Cause 10 is still pretty close for drainage and stuff, I think. 15 is a little more comfortable for drainage to create a swell and get the water out of there.
Well, I wouldn't go anything less than 10 because we don't allow anything less than 10 on any other rear or side yard. So
But again, we have to be able to answer the hardship question. So if everyone is convinced that there truly is a hardship, then you can negotiate on the space, is my thinking. But you have to be convinced there's a hardship, correct?
you said that there are other properties in town that have this, some kind of situation?
There's one on, as Paul said, on South Sioux for sure. I mean, this one's kind of that way, but then if you look at this guy, this is the driveway. So, in a similar situation, staff has made this person observe a 25-foot, or I think this is ag or residential, one of the two, but the front yard setback. So there's that one. There's not quite the same because it's a little wider, but there are a handful in town. Then you have
I think it's a little bit, I think it's a lot different actually, when you're talking about residential versus commercial. In this development, I mean, the two properties just to the east of there are more similar. Now, they have buildings there and they wouldn't be able to add another building, but that, that property that Lee and TJ were in a couple months ago on Split Rock, that they are considering building another building behind that. I think that would be more similar to this, where their front yard is going to be to the backyard of the property that's on Split Rock. And so I just kind of wonder if these properties are around, if we need to have a discussion if, you know, if the property that they're backing up to has a backyard, can that backyard setback be the same as their front yard setback? You know, so, I mean, it's kind of, if a property line is here, why can this guy be 20 feet or 15 feet or 10 feet or whatever the setbacks are, but this guy has to be 25 feet from the same property line? Why doesn't, if this is the property line, why does this person need to be further from it than this person? You know, so if we have these kind of properties, I'm always just hesitant on these variances to just say, without looking at more comprehensive, what other properties are going to be affected by this decision. If we say 10 feet, then all of a sudden, another property would be like, well, why don't I get 10 feet? I have the same situation. And there are, like, what if one of those buildings behind them burns down and we gave this guy 10 feet, and all of a sudden that guy thinks, well, I should be able to build within 10 feet. Maybe it's 15, maybe it's 20. I think that's a conversation that I don't feel like I have enough knowledge on right now today. There's too many moving parts without looking at it with other properties that are similar.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and that's why I'm saying that's because of the unique situation of this lot. To me, a side yard and a rear yard are yards that abut another building, another parcel. In this situation, his front yard abuts another building or parcel, the majority of it. Just the fact that it's parallel with the street, does that mean that he has to be held to a higher setback than the other people? Like you said, up off the same property line.
You said if it were 10 feet, there would be no way to access if there were no other building there. If another building went up to, was 10 feet away from the property line, there'd be no way to access that building from the south.
It was just, if he puts another row of storage units with
Yeah.
doors on both sides.
Yeah.
And there's only 10 feet, you're not gonna be able to take a vehicle and be able to turn it and park it inside where the storage.
How
units
about if there were 15 feet?
That'd be pretty tight, but could probably be done. A typical drive aisle in a parking lot is 25 feet, two-way traffic. And that's about enough room to maneuver and turn into a 9-foot wide parking stall.
So we don't know if he accesses the existing building from the north and the south. I drove past there, but I didn't drive back that far into there. I think I'd like to move that we table it until the applicant can be here.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second to table, so the next meeting would be June 6th, first Thursday of June. Hopefully he or someone from his company could be in attendance to answer some questions. We've got a motion on the floor. All in favor? Oh.
Can we request like a preliminary layout or something? To see what their idea is?
And,
You can certainly ask.
yeah, and yet we're not supposed to make our decision based on the use of the land, only the land itself. Although I know we have said before when people come in, we said, well, yeah, but what if you do this and this instead, then you don't, so.
Okay, we've got a motion. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, we're gonna table this variance until June 6th. If the applicant isn't able to be in attendance, we will have to make a decision without the person here. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, any other business? I don't have the agenda. Is there something else on the
There is
agenda?
not.
Okay, so I would call for a motion. Do we have to just come out of Board of Adjustment and then go back to P and Z?
Nope, P and Z has already been adjourned. So
Okay, P and Z's adjourned. Okay, can we have a motion to close out Board of Adjustment?
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor? Opposed? All right.